May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. So it is my semi to tri-annual losing of my voice. It happens regularly. We'll blame the Cashel Book Fair and all of the talking to small people. But I don't feel bad at all. I just have less speaking voice. Just an FYI. So a number of years ago at the National Episcopal Youth Event, I met a priest who served in Mississippi. Well, actually, I met a number of priests who served in Mississippi, but this one gentleman I had a longer conversation with, and he told me of his experience right after Hurricane Katrina had hit his region. He didn't have a parish at the time, but the bishop had sent out requests, or maybe even mandates, to all clergy that they needed to end up at a church on that following Sunday after the hurricane. In part because some clergy were missing or injured or away, and he wanted to make sure every church had a clergy person. But also some churches just are served by a rotation of supply, and they just needed every priest available. So he was asked to show up to a church that he had some relationship with in the past. And when he and his wife arrived that morning, they were greeted by mostly a cement slab of foundation left. The two of them pulled out the card table that they had brought with them to set up a makeshift altar, and they plugged in a camping coffee pot into the car lighter so that whoever showed up could have coffee hour. Therefore, the two of them hosted church on the bare foundation of what once stood a beloved church for about a dozen or so people who had made it out of their own rubble to make it that morning. After service, the tiny band continued to congregate, enjoying their coffee. And while they stood there, other neighbors, sometimes parishioners, sometimes not, saw them and drove up. They would stop and they would join in conversations of assessing the safety of loved ones as well as property damage. And in the midst, the priest and his wife would come over with the bread and the wine and would offer them the already consecrated communion, which they kept left on the little card table after the morning service. This pattern happened for the next 12 hours. When people arrived, they found church. The church was the people, including all the non-typical parishioners, the neighbors who just came looking for news of loved ones and friends. And they found that the storm could take the building, but the foundation of their little church, its purpose and its community that held it together, would never be taken by a storm. Luke's gospel story this morning is written after the Second Temple's destruction. As we know, due to a number of complicating geopolitical reasons over 2 millennia, that temple has never been rebuilt. Therefore, this account in Luke's gospel is less about prophecy and more about a justification, both in terms of the loss of the temple that the people had experienced, but also that Christian persecution and the illegality of Christianity that had started up shortly after Jesus' ascent. Remember, at the time of Luke's account, many of the first generation of disciples had already been martyred. This passage is also less about end times, as much as it is about the inevitability of change, of tragedy, of destruction, but also what, therefore, we are called to serve into that reality. Now, the idea of building a structure to the gods or God starts with the very early glimpses of civilization. The Sumerians in the Fertile Crescent had small temples built in their farming villages before they had even evolved into cities. In fact, those cities grew up around the temple because the temple predated the city. So as the area grew from village to city-state, the temple structures remained a center point of community. Now, part of our own sacred story tells us that from our very early Bronze Age forefathers, Abraham being from Ur in Sumeria himself, to our Iron Age first kingdom with our first king of David, we didn't have a temple construction. God didn't dwell on a holy hill, but in the hearts and the minds and the homes of the people who were faithful. God lives in a tent, we are told, in the wilderness, as the Torah explains, just like God had through all of the nomadic people in the stories of Genesis, showing the underpinning of the lesson that God would display in full showcase in the incarnation of Jesus, that God dwells in and among God's people, not from a distance, not from grandeur, not separated, but intrinsically one of the community. This changes, at least in perspective, by Solomon's temple, which then is destroyed by Babylon. And God doesn't leave, but God moves with the people into exile. Herod tries again, building the second temple, and we see Jesus regularly at odds, not only with this perspective placement of God outside the people, but also the concept that God would therefore only be in reach of a few elites who could gift access at their whim based on money or power. Jesus throws down this temple well before the Romans do. Yet, shortly after Christianity is made legal, we start up too. In both the West and the Eastern churches, we learned from the traditions and temples prior, and we too construct dwellings for God, meant to be spaces set aside. In their best, we set them aside for community to come together, for the pursued, the persecuted, and the contrite to find sanctuary, to be open doors of access to God that dwells in hearts and homes. But at worst, we have instead built temples unto our own values and vanity, adorning them with riches and wealth so that others may see our splendor, locking off access so that we control God's ministry and God, and promoting a God that functions therefore at arm's length, especially away from the people that we have deemed unacceptable or inappropriate. A building can be a tool or a stumbling block. It can make the work we have been given to do within our community easier, or we can use it to wall ourselves off and away from the people we are called to serve with. Last weekend, I was invited to a learning day for the diocese. I was invited to be a panelist on a day that was meant to give education and the reasoning and foundation on intergenerational ministries and formation, something that we as a parish are doing very well and frankly are way ahead of the curve. As the main speaker was explaining it, she put up a diagram of 3 rectangles. So I'm going to ask you to use your imagination. You got to picture it. The first rectangle had a colorful collection of circles, each independent from each other. Think of it like a multicolored polka dot fabric. The second rectangle had those same colorful balls, circles, and they had arrows connecting them only in one direction, where one color of circles was always in relationship with the other circles, and the arrows always moved from that one color to the other colors, one direction. The third rectangle had all those same circles and balls, but instead this time it was a chaotic mess where all of the balls had arrows connecting in both directions to one another to every single ball. So you can kind of picture all of the arrows, all of the balls. The speaker explained as they moved through the diagram that this first set, the polka dot fabric unconnected to one another, is what we describe as multi-generational. It's where all the generations exist in a space, but they're not necessarily interacting, they're just present. The second one, with the balls that only have one directional arrows, that's what we call cross-generational. That's where one generation gives to the other in a one-directional assumption of the older imparting their wisdom, or the middle generation serving the older who need support. Finally, we get to the chaos, and she said this one's intergenerational. It's where all give, all receive, and it's a true intermixing of the parish. Now, she didn't label the boxes because she was walking us through it, and it struck me when I saw the image how unnecessary the labels are, because really the boxes describe all sorts of church ministries. Church done correctly, where God dwells in and with the people, not in fancy stones and stained glass and in doors that lock, is one where all the balls are chaotic delight of giving and receiving, of our relationship with one another over our status. Since Deacon Nancy has arrived, she has pushed for a name change. She does not want us to call it outreach anymore, which, going back to that diagram, could be displayed in that middle one of balls going one direction. But she'd like to call it community ministries, which is the church in full relationship with the community, not where we give to them, but where we mix it all up, where their programs are our programs, where their needs are our needs, where we serve side by side, hand in hand. But it is not only a name change, it's a perspective shift, where we as church see ourselves less on Holy Hill and more living in tents with our community. Now, we see it in our parish as we do things. We see it where our community loads up our food pantry during the week, like earlier this weekend when a Jewish school from down county made homemade cake-making kits and stuffed our pantry full of them in great joy and gift. When sometimes people come by and drop even mittens and snow boots out of just the hope that someone who needs them will find them. That stuff doesn't ever go through our hands, but it is gifted with intentionality and love. It's where the church is a true conduit of God rather than a filter. We saw it last night at our chili cook-off, where people signed up to make chili, to volunteer, to come and to participate, not because they're one of us, but because they believe in offering food to the hungry, in welcoming the stranger, and that God is among us. I don't know about you, but I found any number of people from my neighborhood that I didn't know were invited or knew about it, and I stumbled across any number of new members of the community to talk about what it is we do in ministry here and to hear about what it is that they do in ministry in the world outside. We'll continue to see it as we work towards our goal of an after-school tutoring program where we will receive teens and teachers that do not come from this building, but where our community offers itself up to feed and to be fed. There is an inevitability to change, and yes, sometimes even destruction. Over 4.5 million millennia, the world has evolved. And in all of it, God has been in the midst of it. From the tiny village temples to the splendor of cathedrals, to the tents, to our new door frames, to even, yes, the empty foundations left after a natural disaster. God has dwelled among the people and has called us into that beautiful chaos of mutual ministry, of mutual relationship, and of serving with. So as we are about to begin, we're 2 weeks shy of beginning Advent, which is the brand new liturgical season of the year. Brand new opportunity for perspective and visioning. I ask you, this building can either be a tool or a temple built unto our own conceit and vanity. St. John's in the new year, how shall we use it? Amen.